Good morning, everyone. I'd like to invite you to take your seats. So first order of business, we will begin by standing ironically, and we'll start with the National Pledge. I pledge myself.
And to be loyal to my country, to be obedient to the laws of GAM, to love my fellow citizens, and to dedicate my energies towards the happiness and prosperity of GAM.
Please be seated. Thank you. Good morning, pleasant morning, even though it's a very wet morning. My name is Scott Ting-A-Kee. I'm a lecturer attached to ICEMILL. So that's the International Center of Modern and Indigenous Languages, Literatures, and Linguistics. The pleasure is mine to be functioning as your chairperson for today. Today, we are all here to learn from this public lecture, which is called Ways of Seeing Migration, Displacement, and Cross-Cultural Imaginaries from the esteemed Professor Stephanos Stephanides, who is a poet, a writer, a translator, a critic, an ethnographer, and a documentary filmmaker. That is a lot of hats. And he has earned a level of distinction in each and every one of those roles. I would also like to thank everyone for coming out, despite the weather being here physically. And also, we have an online audience joining us. So we are going to be enjoying the best of both worlds, physical interaction and the virtual interactions. Okay, so now I will introduce to you our esteemed Vice-Chancellor, Professor Paloma Mohamed Martin is the 11th Vice-Chancellor of the University of Guyana. She is a dynamic servant leader who has been charting the way forward for university for the past 7 years. The Vice-Chancellor would have loved to be here in person, but is unable to do so at this time, and instead will join us virtually to bring her opening remarks. So I'll now hand you over to Professor Paloma Mohamed Martin.
Good morning. Can you hear me well? Colleagues, I just want to know if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My sincere apologies for not being able to be physically with you this morning, but there's a lot going on with me and with the university at this moment. So it requires me to, I guess, split myself in many parts, with very limited time. But I really wanted this morning to at least be here to pay my respects to Professor Stephanides and his doctoral student who are visiting with us, but not only visiting with us, who are here to share their ways of seeing and the methodologies that they're using, which are really important to the work that the university is doing, especially this new center that has been created in the Faculty of Education and Humanities. I'd like to begin by giving you the formal salutations. So Mr. Scott Ting-A-Kee, Master of Ceremonies, an alum of ours and one that we're very proud of. Thank you for your kind introduction. I'd like to also, of course, acknowledge the presence of the Dean, Dr. Semple-McBean, other members of the faculty, Berbice campus and otherwise, who will be officiating on this morning's program. So, Choy, Dr. Gentian Minna, our alumnus, Ms. Johnnell Henery, and of course, Professor himself, Stephanides. I'd like to also thank Mr. Keon Herwood from my office, who has been working very closely with Dr. Carolyn Cummings and the faculty. And I'm sure that Deputy Dean Ms. Hunter was in there somewhere doing something, because she's usually the point person that I send people to. I'd like to also thank those persons who have been working behind the scene as always. And oftentimes they are invisible to us, but they're very, very important to us. And those are the custodial staff who are setting up the venues, as well as keeping us clean, keeping us fed. And especially since I hear it's raining in Georgetown, this is very important for us to recognize that they come to work, rain or shine, and to acknowledge them and thank them. So we're doing that. This activity this morning is part of a series of events that the university has been having, very, very interesting insights into migration, into our identities as human beings, but also Guyanese in particular, but also part of the Caribbean and Latin America. Last week, I believe, we had a very interesting lecture around the similar context as this, from a Colombian professor, Dr. Ana Isabel Markey, on a shared sea, territory, culture, and rights. And we also had, as part of this very same series, and different institutes are working together, and I love to see this. I love to see people kind of cross collaborating, because so much of life is complex. It does not require a single ivory tower perspective from a single discipline. So we've had indenture, because just last week, as you know, we celebrated Arrivals Day. And so we saw work on migration, women, and indenture with collaborations from our own Institute for Migration Diaspora Studies, as well as the Institute for Gender Studies, and some of our own scholars who might be in the room today, Dr. Adams, Ms. Shemaine Joseph, and of course, Dr. Lisa Edwards, and others, Melanie McTurk, who does not think that she's a scholar, but I think that she's certainly a thinker, and very important addition to our voice from the community. This morning, I want to address something that keeps popping up every now and then, and to use this opportunity to really put in context the idea of the university, not only as a degree or certification granting institution. Because a lot of times people will say, well, why are we bothering to do this? Why are we doing all this talking? Why are we doing all this discussion? What is this about? We're supposed to be doing research. Well, this is based on research and different forms of research. So we really need to break the mold and kind of expand the thinking of our colleagues outside of the academy, mostly, who don't understand that, and probably it's our fault, that really any thinking high-level institution has the mandate, and in fact, outside of a mandate, responsibility for making sure that we interrogate the human condition. And this is one of the things that's happening today. And of course, the question of migration and displacement is now one of global consideration, and even public lectures and so on. While they might be viewed as extracurricular by most other people, they're really not. They represent the transition of the academy from a closed ivory tower, which most people quarrel about, and in fact, a lot of our young people are quarreling about and rejecting nowadays, but to a living organism that breathes, that speaks to, with, and collaborates with, listens to, discusses with, and embeds itself much more thoroughly than perhaps in the past and other institutions do in the lived reality of our many, many communities that make up our country. So, ladies and gentlemen, this morning we extend a very, very, very warm welcome to Professor Stephanides and his student as we continue the work of the State National University, the only one, in the democratization of knowledge, bringing our classroom to the internet, bringing it to the virtual space, bringing it to others who are not interested or have not had the opportunity or the time or the capacity to be part of our formal academy. So this is really important for us to make accessible all of these things as much as we can in a systematic, contextual and robust way to the general public. Of course, many of us, I'm entering into that phase myself, not quite yet, but soon, we'll be looking for other ways of expanding what we know, what we love. So the idea of lifelong learning, not only to persons who are in the academy, but who are yet to come into the academy, yes, to school children and so on, who are thinking about these questions and who have assignments to write, and also those who are changing careers or just doing things that they've wanted to do for the longest while. And of course, by validating what we do. If we are speaking to ourselves in the academy and we are not hearing from those on the ground, how they're responding, how our work reflects the truth or validates what they have lived experience, or they perceive conditions, then we are really preaching to the choir and not doing what we really are supposed to be doing. So this morning, I really, really would like to welcome Professor Stephanides back to the university because he's been with us before. And so he has a deep connection, and that deep connection has not left him and certainly has not left us. He has been true to his interests, true to the friendships and to the academic pursuits that he has cultivated over a long time in Guyana and elsewhere. And so we want to thank him so much for coming back to us, bringing back to us this reflected self as he sees it, and also not only bringing the film, which we will see tomorrow, but this whole week of lectures, workshops, film viewing and discussions. We thank you so much, Prof. And with that, I say to you, welcome everyone, and thank you all. I do look forward to the lecture and to learning as much as you can share and beyond. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Thank you, Professor Paloma Mohamed Martin, for those words. Thank you for your reminder that what we do in academia has to impact society and the globe, and also that learning never stops. So now I will invite Ms. Benita Hunter, who will deliver remarks on behalf of the Dean of the Faculty of Education Humanities, Dr. Michelle Semple-McBean. Round of applause.
Good morning, everyone. All protocols have been observed, and it is my pleasure to be here this morning to bring remarks on behalf of our dean and the faculty. I bring you greetings from Dr. Michelle Semple-McBean, who is unavoidably absent from this activity. She's the Dean of the Faculty of Education and Humanities. But it's indeed a pleasure to bring remarks to this very important event that seeks to peel away and reveal the rich background that informs the creative works of Professor Stephanides. We are honored, sir, that we can get a glimpse into your world of multifaceted and multidisciplinary experiences that have that have influenced your creativity. Creativity is the act of turning new and imaginative ideas into reality, often described as connecting existing concepts in novel ways, overcoming self-doubt, and maintain a playful, curious mindset. Key figures like Albert Einstein emphasize that creativity is an inherent joyous process of experimentation and courageous expression. Einstein reminds us that, and I quote, creativity is intelligence having fun. This quote emphasized that creativity isn't about overthinking. It's about embracing the joy of the process. And you, Professor Stephanides, is a living and current expression of Einstein's thoughts. Thank you for being here with us. The International Center of Excellence for Culture and Creative Expression Studies in Sports, ICES, will benefit significantly from your interactions as we seek to enhance the offerings of this particular Center of Excellence and attempt to attract more distinguished faculty and worldwide students. This event will give the faculty an opportunity to display the benefits and depth, the breadth and depth of the plans that we have to enrich our society. The creative arts is an important component of our overall well-being and is one of the real aspects that cannot be supplanted through AI. And I read that. The creative arts are essential to society, fostering social cohesion, emotional well-being, and critical thinking, while driving innovation and preserving cultural identity. It's so very important in our lives. The creative arts provide a universal language of expression, empathy, and social change, acting as a mirror to societal values and a catalyst for evolution. Therefore, Professor, it is so very important that we are here to have a discourse with you, to listen to your ideas, and as I said earlier, have a glimpse into the experiences that have influenced, that have helped you to express yourself so deeply and truly. Looking at your brief blurb about yourself gives us an insight into the wealth of experiences that you bring to us. And so on behalf of the Faculty of Education and Humanities, I wish to say warm and sincere welcome and thanks for gracing us with your presence once again. And I know you're going to tell us something about what influenced you come here in the first place and why it is so important for us to spend some time with you, delving into your heart and soul. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Hunter, for those remarks and really setting the stage for this public lecture that is to come. Now, I would like to turn the spotlight on one of my colleagues. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Lauristan Choy. Lauristan Choy is a lecturer and program coordinator for the Bachelor of Youth and Community Development in the Faculty of Education and Humanities at the University of Guyana. He has also earned the distinction of being a Chevening Scholar. This was in 2020. And his research interests are situated in the intersection of youth studies, child protection, and social policy with a focus on vulnerability, resilience, and mental health within Guyanese and Caribbean contexts. So I'll now invite my colleague Lauristan Choy to take the stage. Thank you.
Standing on protocols already established. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is my distinct honor to introduce the man of the moment, Professor Stephanos Stephanides. Born 1949, is a Cypriot-born author, poet, translator, critic, ethnographer, and documentary filmmaker. He is a former professor of English and comparative literature at the University of Cyprus, where he retired in 2017. His early migration from Cyprus to the United Kingdom and subsequent work and travels in many countries has shaped the transcultural character of his work. Selections of his poetry have been published in more than 12 languages. As a lecturer of the University of Guyana, he became deeply interested in Caribbean cultural expression and his fieldwork with the descendant of Indian indentured laborers in Guyanese villages and sugar plantations give rise to various projects, including 2 documentary films, Hail Mother Cali, Guyana 1988, and Cali in the Americas, New York 2003, and Translating Cali's Feast, produced by Brill and Rodepi 2000. He was awarded first prize for poetry from the American Anthropological Association 1988, and first prize for video poetry for his film Poets in No Man's Land at the Nicosia International Film Festival 2012. He has held residential writing fellowships at the University of Warwick, the Bogalisco Foundation Italy, JNU India, and the International Writers Program at the University of Iowa. He was a judge for the Commonwealth Writers Prize in 2000 and 2010. He is a fellow of the English Association and Cavalier of the Republic of Italy. In 2004, a book, Shifting Horizons, Crossing Borders, Thinking with Stephanos Stephanides, published by Brill. And in 2025, a documentary film was produced by the Press and Information Office of Cyprus about his life and work. Ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together and give a warm Guyanese welcome to Professor Stephanos Stephanides. But he did not come alone. Accompanying Professor Stephanides is Mr. Constantinos Sophocles Constantino. Born in 1990, is a photographer, filmmaker, and visual artist working between Limassol and Athens. His interdisciplinary practice brings together photography, moving image, installation, sound, and archival research to investigate memory, landscape, and the structure of cultural identity. He is a PhD candidate in photography at the University of West Attica, where his dissertation examines the tensions between national imaginaries and lived geographies. He holds an MA in video production, audiovisual media, and motion graphics, and a BA in photography and audiovisual arts, with additional study in analog processes, sculpture, and installation at Mimar Sinan Fine Arts University in Istanbul. His awards include first prize at Katria Photographic Encounters and the Juror of Merit Award at Grand Prix de la Découverte, Paris, alongside scholarships from Cypriot and Hellenic foundations. He teaches at the Cyprus Academy of Art and serves as special scientist in photography at the Cyprus University of Technology. He founded the Cyprus Photography Center and is a member of the Executive Committee of the International Association of Photography and Theory. His work has been exhibited and screened internationally. Ladies and gentlemen, let's also put our hands together and give a warm Guyanese welcome to Mr. Konstantinos Sophocles Konstantinou. Thank you very much, and I would like to now invite Professor Stephanos Stephanides to the podium.
Thank you so much for those very moving introductions. I'm greatly honored, and it's a great moment for me to return. Are you hearing me okay? Yeah. Could, pardon? Okay, could I have some water? I have some, my, for me, I have a very, thank you so much. Returning to Guyana is very special for me. Although I'm a man of many cultures, my life for various reasons has of migration, some voluntary, some not voluntary. It's been a process of change and displacement. And along the way, you develop deep affective connections to some places. And I'll say that Guyana is top of the list of all the places I've gone to. I'm very moved to be back here. When I first came on, I landed on the 27th of August, 1978. I was going back to read my journal, and arriving here seemed almost like an accident. And I've reflected very much about the notions of the philosophical notion of accident. It's something that whether an accident is purely is it bad luck? Is it good luck? Does it have any substance? And it's something that Aristotle reflects and contemplates and categorizes of the different kinds of accidents. And sometimes accidents become essential or substantial. Perhaps it's the afterlife of the accident that creates a certain kind of substance, or an ousia in Greek, when an accident becomes ousioris. And when I decided to come here almost by accident, I'll tell you a little bit about my country of origin. I'm sure it's a very small country. People don't know very much about it, in the same way that if you go to my part of the world and I say I'm going to Guyana, no one knows where I'm going. And I remember when I was doing field work here, and they were asking my colleagues, where is he from? And they said Cyprus. And one person replied, there's no such country. which I thought was, I was delighted at the answer. Because it's good to come from no such country. It gives you a freedom to invent yourself and become who you are without being weighed down by the symbolic powers of where you're from. Like if you're an American, it's not a very good place to be, I think, moving around the world. But being from no such country gave me this openness and creative freedom also to imagine, well, where am I from? And to say the exact circumstances of what brought me here was, as you heard from my biography, I was forcibly displaced by my father at the age of 8. My parents separated, and he decided to take me to England without telling my mother or even telling me until literally we got on the boat. And at the time, Cyprus was, this was mid-20th century. It was a rural, very rural, pre-modern place, a colony, and in the middle of a colonial war. And I was also, as a child, I was very much imbued with an anti-English feeling. So being landed in England in a dark, what seemed to me like a dark place, away from the Mediterranean light, and not knowing the language, not knowing why I wasn't with my mother. It was a dark abyss. But I think looking back at these times, I realized how they have contributed to my growth. So my desire was always to leave, and I learned English very quickly. So English became my literary language and became my stepmother tongue, although my native language is a Cypriot Greek. It's a variation of Greek. But moving between languages also made me a keen listener to understand others, because you always listen partially when you're learning when you're listening to other languages. And that also opened my way. I wanted to leave England, but that also stimulated me to want to learn other languages and other cultures and to find a way out of there. There was one of my favorite lines from Bob Dylan is, how do we find a way out of here? So eventually I decided in the 70s, I was finishing my PhD and I wanted to return to the Mediterranean. But the tensions in Cyprus eventually fractured the island, basically, especially with the Turkish invasion of 74. I mean, independence was it didn't keep the place whole. I remember our first president had this idealist slogan that we were a golden bridge between 3 continents, between Europe, Africa, and Asia. But I don't know how golden it was, because it had it was a bridge full of fractures, and a lot of us fell through the holes. And after the 74 invasion, 40% people were displaced. Many left, and many had already been leaving before. Something we had in common with Guyana, because I think about half the population left in the period after independence in the 70s and 80s. And I wanted to go back after 74, and I went back, and my mother said, leave, what are you coming back here for? She said, there's no room for poets. Take your typewriter and go and live elsewhere. She said, you've got 2 left hands. You're not going to shoot a gun. You're not going to be a soldier. I've been away from Greek for a long time. She said, when you speak Greek, they'll think you're a Turk. So I left and I thought, well, I am not going back to England. And I didn't know where I was going to go, but I said, I'm going to stay in the Mediterranean for a while. And the Mediterranean at the time was also a place of turmoil. I was a young radical, and there was military dictatorships in Spain, Portugal, Greece. And I was back and forth between these three countries. And I decided, well, let me go to Spain. I was fluent in Spanish and Portuguese. And in fact, I was also lucky to avoid the invasion because there was the Carnation Revolution in '74 in Portugal. Took me rushing back to celebrate the Carnation Revolution. So while I was in the western part of the Mediterranean, the invasion of Cyprus took place. So I said, I'm going to Spain for the time being. I didn't know what to do. And I was on a tourist visa, freelancing with cash under the mattress because I couldn't have a bank account. And I would cross the border to France and get a stamp on my passport. And my family and my professors were worried about me because I wasn't settling down. When was I going to settle down? And then the migration began to see that was going back and forth. And they said, well, we know what you're doing, meaning this might be your last stamp. And in the meantime, the celebration of the death of Franco that I was very much involved in, I had various accidents. I got beaten up by the police. I was sitting, because I had a T-shirt with Amnesty International on. We were waiting for them to release the political prisoners. And another time I got mugged as soon as I'd got my cash in my pocket. And I thought, well, I don't know how long I can keep this up for. And everyone was saying, look, get a proper job. And they were sending me announcements of places in England, and I didn't want to go there. And I was reading the Times higher educational supplement, and they wanted someone to lecture in Portuguese at the University of Guyana. So I knew where it was because I was, one of my areas was Latin American literature, and I knew that on the Latin American continent, there was this place called Guyana, but I didn't know what kind of people lived there or anything. So, but I just sent the CV as like a message in a bottle, not knowing what would happen. Not long after that, I got a telegram. In those days, there was no quick messaging. If you wanted to send something urgent, and I got a telegram saying I had been shortlisted for the job. I think they probably only had a couple of international candidates. And I thought, wow, what is this? And I went to start reading, where is this place? Where am I going? And then I got a telegram from my professor telling him to call me. And he said that the then Vice-Chancellor, who was Dr. Irvine, he was a chemist in Nigeria, and by coincidence, he knew the Vice-Chancellor of Cardiff, where I was doing my PhD, who was also a chemist, and they were colleagues in Nigeria. And apparently he called him up and said, who is this guy? Why does a Cypriot speak Portuguese? Why does he want to come to Guyana? They want him the department wants to hire him, but is he going to stay? We don't want someone that's going to come here and just get up and go after 3 months. We want some commitment that he'll fulfill the contract. So my professor said I was a ragamuffin in those days, and he told me, get yourself a tie, cut your hair, come back and speak to the Vice-Chancellor and convince him that you know where you're going and you're going to stay there, at least to fulfill your contract. So this, I thought, well, I'm really confused now. I felt, well, I do want to go, but why is it so bad that they're discouraging me? Do they want me or don't they want me? And I had an aunt in London, my dearest aunt. Most of my relatives I'm not so fond of, but this one was, I always took advice. I felt she had a deep intuition. So I called her up and I told her, I said, can you read the coffee cup for me? Because we have this custom in Greece and Cyprus where after you read the sediment of the coffee and the lines there. I said, read the coffee cup for me. They're going to offer me a job in this place called Guyana. Should I go there? And I thought she wouldn't have an idea of where it was. And she immediately says, go, the world will open for you. And I'm going to come there and I'm going to come there and see you. And it turned out that she did know where Guyana was because she was in the dressmaking business and she knew a lot of West Indian people in those factories. And she had Guyanese friends. And she said, before you go to the Vice-Chancellor, stop at my house and I'll bring 2 Guyanese for lunch and you can talk to them all about it. So when I got her blessing, I thought, well, maybe this was meant to be. And indeed, it did open a world for me, and many worlds, not a world, it opened many worlds for me. And indeed, she did come and visit me, and she blended right in, like as if she belonged to the place as well. During her visit. So my very first impressions, in fact, the rain today, it seemed to welcome me in the same way when I arrived at Henery on the 27th of August, 1978. And I guess my 2 first impressions were, one was the language. I was in the van that brought me into the Tower Hotel. There was African and an Indian descent, and they were talking to each other nonstop, and I could only understand. I understood less than 50%. And I thought, what's going on here? I said, I thought, are they speaking an Indian language? It can't be, because the other guy was of African origin. So, but I was totally fascinated by that as well, since looking at all the movements and nuances of language. And then the other thing was nature and rain, because when I got to the hotel and after the rain stopped, it seemed that the whole landscape and nature came alive, and all the sounds I was hearing were amazing. I thought, well, this is like an orchestra. Suddenly, the whole thing was singing, the crapo. I thought it was like motorbikes. What's going? So, and then I woke up in the morning, and the first time I saw a hummingbird, I wrote all of this in my journal, and then the dean, or actually she wasn't dean then, Joycelyn Long, who was the chair of my department, came to pick me up, and that was another delight. Because I was used to seeing much more formal deans, but she came in with her African dress and her painted toenails and sat in a rickety old car that was about to break down, and she was apologizing for her car and driving barefoot. And so I thought, well, I've come to the right place. Apparently, she was skeptical, and she told me that 6 years later when I was going to leave. She came to say goodbye. I left in the mid-80s when I was going to leave, and she said, I can't believe you're leaving. You've become so Creole. But she said, when I first saw you, when I first picked you up, she said, this you look like an innocent young white boy, and you're not going to last 3 months. So, and in fact, so that was my arrival, and I was very, very sad when I left. I didn't want to leave. Not only did I fulfill my 3-year contract, but I renewed it for another 3 years, in everyone's disbelief. And at the end of the 6 years, I still wasn't ready to go. And the then Vice-Chancellor, George Walcott, I think his name was, he called me to his office. I was going on sabbatical, and I was planning to come back because they were going to promote me to senior lecturer. And when I told him I was coming back, he gave a big grin. He says, "Why are you coming? Are you sure you want to come back, young man?" Because he says, we appreciate your commitment, but the country by that time was an economic wreck. I mean, there was no paper a lot of the times at the university. There's nothing on shelves. I had a hard time keeping my car going, and I said, "Well, I feel part of the place." But he said, "Well, go on your sabbatical and think about it." But he said, "I think you have an academic future, and you will not have the opportunity to develop it here." So I went home and wept. And I said I was sure I was going to come back, although destiny took me elsewhere. But I would say that the Guyanese people never left me. And many of the people I knew have passed away. I had wonderful, enlightening colleagues. I was in the Faculty of Arts. They were very close to me, and they opened my mind to so many things. And I lived in a neighborhood. I was close to Martin Carter, who is a great inspiration. I'd visit him often. Across the road was A.J. Seymour, a very different personality, who much more formal, but he would also encourage me and say, "Young man, are you writing? Get on with it. Life is short." Stanley Greaves was there in my house all the time, and Vanda playing music. So my environment was very inspiring. And it was enriching. And even though when I was coming, they say, "Well, don't expect a research library." Well, I didn't need a research library because there was a whole world out there of different, all kinds of people, nature, language. It was, for me, it was like a coming of age. I mean, coming of age is usually 18, even though I was 28 when I came here. It was, for me, it was what in German they call the Bildungsroman, which is like the portrait of the artist as a young man, where you grow. So for me, it really shaped me both emotionally, intellectually, spiritually. So in a sense, I'm really grounded here. I think even though I'm not native to here, I feel as a writer, the perceptions and my approach to things. Even though when I write about Cyprus, I eventually got back to Cyprus in '92, much of it is filtered through the way that the experience of being here shaped my imagination. So there's the count, and it's two small countries very distant from each other. And in a sense, I feel they're in between countries, and I also always write in between. So this is like in between. I'm from an island. This is almost island. It's between a continent and the islands, or you have the jungle behind and the sea on the other side. So they're in between spaces, and I've always lived between spaces. I've always on the edge, and I think that listening to Creole and and beginning to get into it. I was also privileged that John Rickford was here for a couple of months during my first year, and I was reading his books. And so all of that also showed me the possibilities of language, because Creole to me and the way that people think about it and speak it is also made me realize that what is your vernacular? The vernacular is not something fixed, but you're willing it into being. And when I hear people speak, it's the way they choose how to speak and what register it is. It's not like a negative legacy. They've turned it into a positive legacy. And as being not an English writer writing in English, that made me realize the possibilities of how we can use language. So, and how I can play with it. So I can write in English and not be an English writer. There's many interesting examples of writers in world literature that have been caught in this predicament. One famous example is Kafka, who was living in the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and he was a Jew, and he was caught between Yiddish. German was the language of the empire. Czech was the language of the region he lived in. Yiddish was his community language. And in one of his letters, he says it's impossible to write in German, it's impossible to write in Yiddish, it's impossible to write in Czech, it's impossible not to write. So in the end, he wrote in German, but if you're writing as an outsider. So I think in this state of in-betweenness is what I really identified with. Because for me, I felt it's impossible to write in English because I'm neither British nor American, nor do I identify with that. But I was too far away from Greek to write in Greek. Plus, my native Greek is more like a Creole, the Cypriot Greek. So I was also caught between impossibilities. So being caught between impossibilities, you find your own voice and make it possible. So, this made me think of, it's the kind of, Deleuze-Guattari talk about this as minority literature, which seems paradoxical, because if you're writing in a major language, as Kafka did in German, and as I do and other people in English, but you're writing minority language literature, in their terms, what minority is, because you're writing on the edges of language. So there's a kind of radical approach to how you say it, because how you express yourself, because you are writing and resisting the hegemony of the language you're writing in. And this was the other important lesson I had in Guyana, getting into post-colonial literature and realizing the possibilities of mixing these different levels of what may be the hegemonic language or a referential language and the vernacular and languages that travel. So the four functions that Deleuze-Guattari say about language is that there's the vernacular, there's the referential, there could be the national, there's the commercial languages, and there's the cosmopolitan languages, there's languages of myth and of spirituality as well, or the languages of the past. And all of these interact. Even if you're monolingual, you're not really monolingual. That you're using them. There's all these layers going on all the time. And this is what I really appreciated about the Caribbean Creole culture. As when I was speaking in a Kali temple yesterday in Berbice, I told them that how they're all multilingual, because even though they speak this everyday Creole, they also shift back and forth. Because when they go into deeper Berbice, I only understand half of it. But also there's other layers going on. You hear Hindi bhajans, you hear Sanskrit chants, you hear Tamil, and these are not, but they're also meaningful. They're not simply language, ancestral language of the past that they repeat, but the way that all of these are intertwined at different times. So the way we move between the historical, the mythical, the everyday, these are strategies that we go through either consciously or unconsciously. The other great lesson I learned here is the notion of the la longue durée, as the long duration that Fernand Braudel, the historian of the Mediterranean, uses, in that the way we see history is not just the events and the narratives of the short duration, but what's there in deep memory. Well, he, as a historian, he talks especially about the geological aspect, but someone as a literary person, I also see that I see it from the philosophical dimension. And the long duration is deep time and how this shapes who you are. And the connections are then, you're breaking out of the boundaries of the nation state. I mean, so the nation state is an event, and the nation states that we are living in right now are also very new. Guyana is a new nation state, and so is Cyprus, new post-colonial nation states. But at the same time, there's nothing new about us, because we're all connected to cultures that have been there in many layers over lots of time. And he develops this concept through geology, mainly. And for me, that was very significant. And I learned also a lot from Wilson Harris in that respect. He's very much writes in deep time. And when he came to Cyprus and I was talking about the wall, he said, well, that's the density, but you have to find the transparency through the density. There's always cracks that you have to look through. Derek Walcott also made me very much aware of this. He's very much aware of this transoceanic memory. So that made me think a lot also about the memory of the Mediterranean and what Alejo Carpentier called the New Mediterranean, the Nuevo Mediterráneo, which is the Caribbean, and the connections between us. And in my own, and Glisson talks about the Mediterranean as a closed sea, whereas the Caribbean is an open sea, and it's an archipelago, and there's a poetics of relation. So how do I think of the poetics of relation in terms of the closed sea that is the Mediterranean? But the Mediterranean is not entirely a closed sea. And what I'm thinking about the history of his geology, you look at the cracks and the entries and exits. So much of my thinking about my own multiple displacement is departures and arrivals and exits and entries. These are really what shape our experience and imagination. There's not an essential identity, but there is a process of displacements, or that in the end, the accumulation of displacements become a substance. And in the Mediterranean, there's one important thing, and Derek Walcott was also, I think, aware of this, was this the opening of the Mediterranean. On the west side is the so-called Pillars of Hercules, that in ancient times, the motto was nothing more beyond. That if you go beyond that point, you perish, you go into the inferno. And Dante said that when Odysseus went beyond, he went into an inferno, because you only go beyond this closed space. It's a kind of divine hubris, that you should really keep yourself defined to the human. And Walcott was aware of this, and in his epic Homeros, that's a wonderful metatextual critique of our own epics, as well as being an epic for the Caribbean. It's obviously an intertextual. He's in dialogue with what goes on in the Mediterranean. And what's interesting in the history of it as well is that when sometimes this crack would close and the Mediterranean would evaporate and it'd leave the big bed of salt. And then when it would open again, the sea would come in from the Atlantic and replenish it. So these, to me, it's another poetic of relationship. And on the other end of the Mediterranean, the Levant, is the east and the west. I'm a Levantine. I'm from the eastern part of the Mediterranean. There was no Suez Canal until recently, but obviously there was desire to crack and create another connection between the seas there. So it's this process of closing and opening, and the transformations and multiple transformations, and how we can experience this also in deep time. So my first experience of Guyana, perhaps the relationship between our countries, I saw as the post-colonial one. But then I began to see, well, there's a deeper level there. And this deeper level can be created in the myths and that come down to us. And this is something that Walcott very much takes in. And the other thing that I appreciated here is also I learned to appreciate the oral tradition and what this meant. And the work of Walter Benjamin also helped me shape this, because it's also to do with memory and how we perceive memory. And in one of his essays, The Storyteller, he says that the essence of the oral tradition is the afterlife of what's passed on, that you don't actually pass it on literally, because you don't remember everything. But what you remember is what's essential. If you don't write it down, but it's still passed on, it means what is meaningful to the storyteller, oral territory, is passed on. And he turns this also into philosophy of history, because in the philosophy of history, there's also these glimpses and that emerge out of something that is solid in this process. It's what is the afterlife. And it's the same with translation. So translation is not simply a linguistic process. In Greek, the word for translation is metaphrasis, which is related to transportation, metaphora. Metaphora is also metaphor. So the metaphor is something that you carry, is something that's carried across. You're not just using something to stand for something else. You're speaking in metaphors to carry something across, which is translation. So again, translation is not simply a replica, but it's to do with memory and what do you remember, and how and what you remember creates an afterlife. So it's very much the afterlife of the text. So memory and forgetting are fundamental. Like the Mnemosine, the early Olympian goddess who was the mother of 9 muses. And the 9 muses have different functions. It's epic, it's history, it's poetry, it's comedy, it's tragedy. And what to remember and how do we forget? And in effect, as temporal beings, we live in layered temporalities. We're always retrieving what we lose, because we're losing things all the time by the nature of time. We're embodied beings, we're always losing. And in the process of making art, of making literature, we're always retrieving. So we're always in this edge between losing the sense, we're living in an allegory of loss and retrieval, which those that experience displacement and migration feel this even more intensely. And displacement can also be even if you're staying in the same place, because when you remember who you were as a child and who you were now, even if you haven't gone anywhere very far, there's various kinds of displacement. I don't know how my time is going. I have a lot of things to do. I'm okay. Pardon? Another 10 minutes? Okay. Because I'm working with the oral tradition. I'm telling you what I remember. So you have to cut me off because I want to hear from you. So please let me know when the time goes, because I haven't kept, I don't know, going back to my abstract, one of the concepts, perhaps another, let me talk about my return to Guyana again. I was talking about the Bildungsroman, and last year I learned a new word. I think it's a neologism, which is the Volendungsroman. It's a neologism. I learned it by accident last year. Someone asked me to review an article on Garcia Marquez' Love in the Time of Cholera as a Volendungsroman. And I thought, what is this Volendungsroman? And I looked it up, so it's a neologism that's the opposite of the Bildungsroman, which is a coming of age. And in old age, like myself, you're not opening up and ways of moving into the future, but you're beginning to have a sense of an ending and weaving all these threads together from the past. So you're looking for a sense of weaving together completion. So this is coming back to my emotional beginning about returning to Guyana. Returning to Guyana for me is feeding into my process of my writing now, which has become more like a Volendungsroman rather than the book. And since this was identified, the Bildungsroman from my youthful life 47 years ago when I arrived here, or maybe 48, I've perhaps lost count to now. It's bringing all these threads together. And what brought, one of the things I was deeply involved in, and I should make some time to speak about this because it's the new film that I've just completed called Remembering Mariamma that I will be screening tonight. And why did I get into film? In the years I was here, I fell in love with Berbice. I kept, with all the tension, I think the economic depression was harder on Georgetown than in the rural areas because you relied on technology more than, whereas there, it was also like my early childhood, in my rural childhood in the Mediterranean, where I remember getting water from wells, and I remember we had light from paraffin lamps, and then the electricity came. And Berbice, the people I met, most of them lived in very basic conditions. But what delighted me is when I got into all the rituals that were performed and passed down through oral tradition, and especially what was known as Kali Mai Puja or Mariamma Pusai. And I first went there, I think about 1980, there was a big puja. I was told to fast for 3 weeks, join in. I was welcomed straight away, and I was totally overwhelmed. I thought it was a big compound full of activities. All the 9 muses were there, dancing, singing, performing in different ways. And the spirit was high. There was no electricity, no water. We bathed in the river. And when I left, I thought, wow, this is special. And it also hit into deep memory. Like there was something, do I know this thing? It's like the ancient Orphic mysteries. It resonated very deeply. And the people were very welcoming. I made friends with a few families. And like many of my colleagues at the university, part of my morning is thinking of them, and they've died and moved on. And also the people I met there, many of them have died and moved on. But the children were also inspiring. I made many close contacts with the children that are now leaders. So that relationship never left me. And the first film I made in '88 was called Hail Mother Kali. And again, this was another accident because I was on a train in London, and Lakshmi-Kali-Charan jumped on the same carriage that I was on. And she said, Stefan, we didn't know where to get in touch with you, and we want to bring you back to Guyana to speak about the madrasis. And this was a conference for 150th anniversary indentured labor. And I thought, wow, it was the oral, I hadn't written anything, so they're paying for me to come, and I hadn't even written or published anything. It was very much a personal thing, but it was a great compliment. But I think I was so well known because they were wondering, what's this Greek going up and down to Berbice? And another important line I remember from Mark Matthews. I collaborated with Mark Matthews on various things, and we were interviewed on the radio. And I was asked, why is a Greek going to Berbice every weekend? What are you looking for? And before I could answer, Mark said he lost the oracle at Delphi, and he'd gone to Berbice to find it. So, which to me, that caught things in a nutshell, this notion of loss and retrieval, because this mode of culture that is there in ancient Greece has been lost with modernity. whereas here, it was still there, not lost at all. So that to me was, Mark understood this perfectly. And the reason, when Lakshmi told me to come back and speak, I thought, well, I have to make a film because it's an oral performative tradition. I'm not going to come and speak academically about who the madrasas are, blah, blah, blah. They have to see the performance. So to me, a film was the closest I could take it to oral tradition. So that was my entry into film. So I just decided I'm going back to do this thing. And again, full of obstacles. There was no water or electricity. There was no video cassettes. I had to beg for used ones from the Guyana Film Center, take a generator. It was an exciting project, but it opened up my world to many things in the process of making it. And now, so what this new film came with it was inspired in 2023. I was in New York. The other thing that I found interesting also was I thought everyone's leaving, so this thing's going to die away. They're all going to America. They're entering modernity. They're going to forget all about what they're doing. They're going to make money, become professionals. But what also excited me was when I met them, I met these people in New York, and they recreated within a warehouse. And I thought, well, I was used to the tropical environment, the light. I said, how is this goddess going to be kept alive within this warehouse with McDonald's across the road? So that other element of displacement and migration and retrieval, and how they were able to find this connection between global modernity and this ancient ritual was very meaningful. And in 23, by meaningful coincidence, I was invited to be a judge on the Guyana Literature Prize. And it was the week before the prize, it was the big puja that I had filmed in '88. So I said, I'm coming back. I want to come back and do it again and look at it historically now, who I was then and what brought me into it, and where I am now, and who this new generation is, these children that I knew and they've grown up. One interesting thing is the leader at Blairmont Kali Temple who's now in his 50s. He was maybe 10 years old when I met him. And the children would talk to me all the time. And he said to me, he says, Uncle, we want to see where do you live and where do you work? And I said, if your father lets me, I'll take you to Georgetown. And he and another boy came and stayed with me for a week. And I brought them into my class at UG. And he still talks about it. He announced it yesterday. He said, I went to university one day in my life, and this professor took me there. So there's these two communities. This is why I'm glad that University of Guyana created this visa, this visit, because it brought those two things together. That was where I did the field work because I was here, and this came together. And I should also, if I have time, I'll talk about, you keeping time for me, Konstantinos, 5 minutes? I've probably left out a lot of things, but that's always, I wanted to talk a little bit about cosmopolitanism, because I think that was I was talking about cosmopoetics in my abstract, and I haven't even mentioned it yet, right? But I think the notion of Creole cosmopoetics, I thought about with the work of Derek Walcott. But again, the ancient Mediterranean roots of cosmopolitanism. I think it's often, the term cosmopolitanism is often misunderstood because it's often conflated with globalization, but which is a new capitalist order. But the origin of cosmopolitan in the ancient world was in fact a radical challenge to the polis or the polity, that the cosmos is unbound and unknown and much bigger than the polis. When the word was first coined, I don't know, but some people ascribe it to the cynic Diogenes, when Alexander the Great heard of him and he went to meet him, and he was sleeping in a barrel, and when the emperor came there, he told him to move out of it, to move out of his way so he can be in touch with the cosmic light. And he asked him, "Where are you from?" And he said, "I'm a cosmopolitis, I'm a citizen of the cosmos." So the idea of the cosmopolitanism is to challenge the polity. So again, it's the idea of the long duration having an effect on the event itself. And this tradition also was carried on by Zeno, who was a Phoenician living in the ancient kingdom of Citium in Cyprus, who was shipwrecked in Athens. He was a wealthy man, but he shipwrecked, lost all his wealth. So this is the idea of accident again. And so he began to reflect between the limitations of the polis and the possibilities of the cosmos that is unknowable. I mean, you can call it divine or you may not call it divine, but it's something boundless, beyond human imagination. But in the process of imagining, and this is where the creativity comes in the process of imagining, you're also challenging the social, as it's shaped by the boundaries of power. So it's really a way of challenging the power hegemonic structures. Zeno was more compromising than Diogenes, who was like a total marginal. He was like a hippie. But Zeno also realized that the social is part of our being in the world. But to understand our being in the world, there is a dialogue with the social, but there also has to be a dialogue with the otherworldly that we do not know, that it's other, but it's us as well. The cosmos is within us. So that dialogue, that dialectic, you have to be aware of that and break the edges and the boundaries of the polity. And my own journeys back, and I think this is what I learned in my own journeys to many places and places in between, but especially between Cyprus and Guyana. And it's also coming back here, remembering the sense of grief and the sense of mourning, but the sense of joy as well. For a long time, what held me back was also a sense of mourning. I thought, I'm going to go back there. But my friends, if they haven't migrated, they died. But then I didn't. What I began to realize is still joy. There's new generations that are coming forth. And I have to take joy in that as well. And the afterlife or the translation of what I originally experienced. Shall I close it off there and we can open and have a dialogue? Sorry? Do you want me to finish with a poem? Okay. Okay, one I'll use is in the new film. I guess my first film, my personal voice was I was trying to be non-intrusive. I wanted to stand back from it a little bit, but now, and these boys that I knew from Berbice, they're very wise, and one of them, who's now I knew when he was about 9, and he said, "Look, Prof," he said, "you say all these things about us, but what about you? We want to know where you come from. Where did you come from? How did you come here? And what did it mean to you?" So I really appreciated their sense of the two-way process. I use this poem. So in the film, I intertwine that personal journey and commentary, and I weave it in and out with the people talking. So there's my voiceover, and I have the voiceover of people as well, other people. So I think I'll read Life's Weight, which is, I think I rewrote it for the script. So it's a bit different from the printed version, but let me, I think I need my glasses. Sorry. How much does life weigh? Sometimes as heavy as the moment you dropped your mother's body in the soil, heavier than that last stony kiss. Before you close her eyes forever and you bury memory's burden. When you rehearse life's habits and a voice commands you, wash the mud off the watermelon skin before you slice it. Lay out the tomatoes ripe bottom side up. Throw the greens into the water only after it boils. You remember that someone told you once that all mothers are crazy. Maybe this is appropriate the day after Mother's Day. You remember that someone told you once that all mothers are crazy and nothing is without solution. If children must have mothers, there should be rituals to bury the umbilical cord, beat the drum hard and spin the flame till the body lifts entranced and reappears in the world in a will-o'-the-wisp. Unexpectedly grows wings and flies, feet twirling and rising, you emerge with the abandon of night on your face, as if memory never existed, as if you never belonged to a lost island, licked her waters dry, lapped them up from every creek and crevice, an island that no longer exists, perhaps never was. And all that matters is this moment in a faraway land, in the gentle sway of the hammock, and you hear a swish in your ribcage, and your heart rises high above the canopy of the coconut trees, and the coolie woman brings you a bowl of rice and dal. The cage door closes, and the coconut drops with a thud, as you hear the labor in her bare feet resonate with your grandmother's footsteps. And you think of her house and ask, how much rubble must you pick up to rebuild it from the discarded limbs, or just leave it to the strangers who inhabit it, and who in their strangeness resemble your kin, lying on the terrace on August nights and flying with the thrill of shooting stars, and it might suffice to feel the hammock embrace you like a call as you watch the elusive and nomadic clouds, always ready for an outpour of water, formless liquid that you want to catch by the bucketful to remind you of your own torrential nature and the sweetness of your skin, finding the balance between actuality and memory, between joy and loneliness. Life is light when it is most unlikely, at the beginning of love's insanity, and when your friends smile and touch you, opening and filling holes that make you wonder how many lives you have lived, and if identity is just one life or many lives watching you with myriad eyes, and we stars burning ourselves out in our intoxication. And you speculate, who sees, who listens, and you might just close your eyes and blow it all out in the abandon of flesh without memory. So we're going to have a dialogue now, right? Is that you? How will?
So I'd like to thank Professor Stephanides for his wonderful lecture about the in-betweenness of identity, the world of words, and creativity. All right, so I will now invite Dr. Gentian Miller, a senior lecturer within ICEMILL, to come forward, and she will lead the question and answer segment and create this dialogue with Professor Stephanides. So, Dr. Gentian Miller, I'll hand it over to you.
Where are you going to sit?
Dr. Miller, you want to sit?
Quite an experience being in this room and probably being entranced. I don't know. I probably at a loss for words, but I have the honor to be the moderator for this wonderful session now, where you, the members of the audience, you have the chance of asking your questions or just making a comment. And I guess you'll just follow the whole flow of how it has been going. Thank you. Can I see hands? Okay, there is one there. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm actually directing this question to Mr. Stephanides. His work is artistic, I would say, and there is an overlap between art and politics. So what I wanted to ask is, what is your perspective on the restrictions that are now being put in place in today's world leaders, for example, America, against immigration? As somebody who would have been a migrant before and has done work on Guyana's diaspora and populace. I wanted to know what your thoughts on it are. And as well as, I should mention, Guyana's population is currently changing as well. We're seeing an influx of Spanish immigrants and Indian immigrants. So I wanted to know what your thoughts are on that as well.
But I would know who you are. It's nice to know the people, your name and who and where. And
Hi, I'm Shandesia. I currently work in the Guyanese languages unit as a secretary, but I love all things art and politics
Great,
as well.
yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, in terms of what's going on in the US, I'm totally horrified. And we're all migrants. I think our human condition is migration. My struggle has always been to break down borders, and the influx that you're seeing here in Guyana is also an influx in, which is strange, the fact that this population emptied out, and now you're having an influx with the new wealth from all around. And the same thing has happened in Cyprus. We had all this displacement, as I said, with the division and people leaving. And then we've also had an influx of new migration from the region all around, especially we're very close to all the wars. So we've had Syrians, Lebanese, also after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the opening of Eastern Europe, we had Eastern Europeans, Russians have come in. So it makes it, I mean, for me, one important positive thing with all of this is the fact that we had this false binary of ethnicities between Greeks and Turks, of course, the division, but now both sides have been overflown by influx of immigrants. And to me, it's really welcome. I would say mostly, in the sense that I guess in the case of Cyprus, the land that was lost is also being appropriated by, we have an Israeli billionaire who's selling all the land that was appropriated by Turkey from the Greeks. So I mean, it's obviously not utopian, but generally speaking, migrants are welcome. And there's also in Cyprus, there's a lot of Africans, there's Asians, and I always get into conversations with them. And I've asked Konstantinos, I said, our next project, I'm talking to people from Cameroon and from Burkina Faso and from Nepal. And I said, I want to get to know some of these people, and we'll do a kind of audiovisual text about their lives and how they got here. So, and in fact, seeing African and Asian people all around me now makes me feel I'm in Guyana as well. So,
Yes, we have a question here from the
Petam Busan. When you talk about your past, how much do you rely on memory or your journal?
how much do I rely on memory?
Yeah, and your journal.
Okay. I believe primarily on memory. Yeah, I mean, the journals are there, and but I only occasionally pick them up, like if something is troubling me. I mean, for example, when I was coming here, this is why I remembered this day I arrived in Guyana. I dug up this journal and said, well, what was the first thing I wrote when I landed here? So I use it as a prompt, but it's usually memory. But it's also, I seek things out from other people as well. So it's a kind of field work. So I kind of reshape and fill in what I remember. And in that way, I also call it memory fiction, because it's not a factual recording of things. I talk to people and they tell me this, and then I fill in, well, what might have the conversations have been? And I invent conversations from what I know. So it's not a replica, it's a recreation. Yeah.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I think most of you know me in the room. I'm Carolyn Cummings. I have two questions. The first question is, what are the most significant events or scenes or memories that you have of Guyana? Those memories that, or a memory that bears very strongly from when you first came. And the second question is, what are the significant differences, or is there a difference that you notice that stands out to you now in your brief interactions with the culture in Guyana, in relation to your experiences then?
Okay. Yeah, that's so. Let me get the two parts of it. The one is, how do I feel about Guyana now in relation to my experiences then? And
yes.
The first one was, what are the significant memories that I have?
Yes.
Okay. Both very interesting questions. The significant memories, I mean, different things pop up at different times. That are stimulated by conversations, and I say, "Oh, yes, I remember that," and and I think that's how memory works. I mean, it doesn't stay still, but someone says something, and then you remember something else. I mean, one of them was that first big puja in Albion that I mentioned already, and it wasn't only the big puja, it was also the environment. The fact that there was this harsh history of labor and the cane field and all the rest of it. You remember in that context. The other memory was the initial entry into the country, which still resonates with me. When Jocelyn Long came to pick me up, and then things pop up in my memory. Sometimes with the association of words, like someone was explaining to me the origin of the word Fullerman, because for a Muslim, and I'd only come across that word in Guyana, and it came from, apparently the Fulani were Nigerian Muslims. And it brought to mind one incident I had when someone took me for a Fullerman. And which is a funny story, because I was coming back I was bringing one Pujari to Georgetown, and I told him, so there's a lot of, this is an anecdote, but it's a memory, and it's an interesting memory. My car kept breaking down on the way to Berbice, and I was so I have a lot of car breakdown stories, because every time and he wanted me to bring him to Georgetown. I said, look, we got to go to Skeldon and get some black market tires. He said, I don't have time. So I said, well, you better pray to Kali that she gets to Georgetown, because I don't think we're going to make it. And he prayed to Kali, and she got us to the East Coast, and the car broke down. And I said, bye. You should have said a prayer and tell her to take us to 152 Church Street. she heard and brought us to, but now what we're going to do? And there was no one, it was night. And then someone came up, a young man from nowhere, and said, he came to help us out. And he looked at me and said, full man must help each other. And I was going to speak because I'm very honest. And I was with another friend, Karna Singh, the eldest son of Rajkumari Singh, and he kicked me to mean keep your mouth shut. and he said, my auntie has a car like yours. And she will lend you a wheel. And we went there, and he wake up his aunt and said, he's Fullerman just like we. and I thought, I can't lie, but I can keep silent. In effect, I'm Western Asia. And to me, that was these kind of exchanges. Also, identity issues like this kept coming up in different ways, and this is why I was also pleased when people, when someone said Cyprus is no such country, because I was taken for all kinds of things. A red man, a fuller man, a Portuguese. So the significant memories for me are those that, like this, that gave me this this sense of the fluidity of identity and of who I am. Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. So I have a bit of a observation / question. I'm sorry, we introduced ourselves to each other already. My name is Kojo McPherson, and I'm a lecturer within the center. So your experience with Guyana, I think, is both very novel and I think very unique, and is that it wasn't an extractive one. And it wasn't typical at all to have people from your part of the world in Guyana, particularly that point in time. And I just wanted to have your thoughts on a trend that I read about very recently. So there's an article in The Economist in March of 2026 that spoke about large-scale migration from Europe to other parts of the world. I think it said 4 million people in 2024 alone. And it just makes me, it concerned me a bit, because I was wondering about the nature of the interactions that would result from that mass migration. Our experience in Guyana with people coming from Europe is largely extractive and exploitative, but yours was not. And I noticed that you were speaking about cosmopolitan and breaking down cosmo and polis and talking about it being a conversation. So I just wanted to, I know it's kind of a heavy line of inquiry, but just your thoughts on this trend that we're seeing. Yeah, that's basically it.
Of Europeans leaving Europe to go elsewhere, you're saying?
Yes, yes.
Okay, good. Sorry, I also didn't answer the second part of your question, so I'll come back to that as well, about past and present, right? Clearly, I mean, with migrations, I mean, this hegemony is in migration, and this is why I also had some, although I said I was in all for migration, I had reservations, because it does have the other edge to it, because if in the power hierarchy, which is the case of colonialism, so what that you go, are you going there to occupy, or are you going there to receive? And so which I suspect is what you're getting at, is it? About this trend from Europe outwards. I wasn't aware of it. I know that the European population is diminishing because of lack of reproduction and a lot of old people, and there's an influx of migration. But you're saying about Europeans going out. I mean, again, it's probably a double-edged knife, probably, because some go to be in their own cocoon. They have money and they want to go and be somewhere else. But I think there's also probably another dimension in that there is an opening. They're looking for an opening up from what is a decaying and old civilization. And I think this is also the part of the contemporary politics of Europe as well, and the far right emerging, and all the tension about all the migration coming in and all the boats coming across the Mediterranean from North Africa into Europe. So I think it's a double-edged knife, but nonetheless, it's part of our political consciousness, and I think this is why I'm interested in the notion of reclaiming cosmopolitanism in its radical potential, rather than the hegemony of global capital that claims poorer colonized regions for itself and claims some rights, like the war that's going on now in Iran, that the hegemonic powers feel that they have those rights. I don't know if that was what you were asking, or if I missed it. If I missed some aspect of your question. So, I mean, you were asking about the two-way process, right? In a sense, yeah. Pardon? Yeah. Okay. And the other question from Carolyn about past and present. There is, it's been I was away for a long time, so it's, although I've come back, this is the third time now in the last 3 years, after an absence of 35 years. It's good to see new wealth and development, but at the same time, it brings about a certain amount of skepticism of how this new wealth will be used and how it will be distributed. And where the poverty that I saw then, how much will it come out of? But in terms of my everyday interaction with Guyanese, I don't feel change either. I feel there's a sense, the personalities, the way they communicate, their openness, that warmth is still there. So how this will play out and how this new wealth will change, will ruin that, it's hard to see. But all you can do is be socially conscious and be socially active. And I think probably much of I haven't been here long enough, but as I said, my everyday experience and the feel of the people to me is very much the same as it always was. I don't feel, well, I've come to, as far as the people are concerned, I don't feel I've come to a different country. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We have a question here for you. Yeah. Yes, thank you. Hello, Stefan. So yes, we know you're Greek, And my name is Danuta Radzik. And I think all of us here, having heard you speak, feel that you are equal to us. But I wanted to ask you about the so-called Greek civilization, right? Because, you know, we all know about Plato and Socrates and all those wonderful buildings and so on. And my understanding is that somehow transferred to Western civilization, which then undertook that, you know, they were the apex of this, while other civilizations, Indian civilizations, African civilizations, civilizations of people all over this world, somehow the way, yes, it was done, happened, evolved, and continues to evolve is that they are secondary. So I wanted to ask you, as a Greek, right, living in Greece or in an island in Greece, how do you, right, how do you see that Greek civilization that we all learned about and how it relates to, you know, your understanding and your lived reality as a Greek?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. Because the ancient Greeks that has been appropriated by Western civilization it was not Western civilization when it existed. So it was an appropriation, and it became for the West's hegemonic power. They used it as a foundation. So, so to me, it's a problematic thing. This is why I think it's an interesting issue. And this also emerged, especially after the French Enlightenment. And the nation state of Greece has also appropriated it for itself because it became prestigious in the West. So the foundation of the modern Greek state was inspired by the French Enlightenment when all these new nation states started emerging. And this is why my whole notion of I was speaking about the long duration and saying that the long duration is more important than the event and what impact does it have on the event. With the emergence of new nation states, you create a national imaginary, and the new nation state of Greece that came, which is new, it emerged in the 1820s when they freed themselves from the Ottoman Empire. And when Athens by that time had been some kind of provincial backwater of the Ottoman Empire. So they chose to join Western hegemony, whereas the ancient Greek civilization had much more contact with East Africa, at least or Northeast Africa, and with Asia. And I guess I didn't have time to go into all of that as well, because the other journey, and I also began to explore that other journey by being in Guyana and looking into Tamil culture, is that the Greeks and Romans traded with southern India, and 2,000 years ago, you find Greek and Roman coins. So it's part of politics, basically, and part of my task as well is to explore the identity before this nation state, and I'm very resistant to that notion. And I think Cyprus also is a different nation state from Greece, and that's also been problematic in terms of our modern politics. And the partition of Cyprus, I think, was also provoked by that, because there was the far right who saw this superiority of the Greeks and wanted to take the whole of Cyprus for themselves, whereas in effect, our DNA, and we're Levantines, is really, really very mixed. I mean, I think Konstantinos did a DNA test. I asked him to, and there wasn't Greek there. It was mostly Western Asian, and Balkan and I did one, and it was 60% Greek Italian and 40% Levantine, like Egyptian, Syrian, Lebanese, Armenian, Iranian, a trace of Iranian and Kurdish, and so we're also Western Asians. And this one of my favorite modern Greek poet is Kavafis, which was a wonderful poet, and he has a poem that's called "Sailing Home from Greece," not sailing home to Greece. He was born in Istanbul and he grew up in Alexandria, and he creates this dialogue with Callimachus, who was a peripatetic philosopher, and he says to him, don't you feel we are going home in the seas of Cyprus, Syria, and of Egypt? Asia's in our blood, and we have to tell the truth. This is what Greeks are supposed to do. So, which is a very radical statement written in 1912. And I think it's an interesting moment because this was when this Ottoman Empire was breaking down and the British Empire was taking over. So this small new nation state is not who we are. We're a mixture of all these peoples in that whole region. So that's another aspect of my of what I would call radical cosmopolitanism. And it also divides our politics in Cyprus between left and right and who we are. I mean, I said to one friend when we were joining the European Union, I said I'm not European, I'm 11teen. And she said, well, speak for yourself. Meaning that some people want to tack on to what is hegemonic, whereas I would like to resist it and reappropriate all the things that were lost in this new world order of nation states that creates our boundaries and wants our identity to be tied into the nation state. And the other thing is that, and this is an interesting point also in contrast to talking about the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, in that when the nation states emerged, and I think it's Benedict Anderson who says this, he says that, that we created a national imaginary to the past, one linear imaginary, whereas in the Americas, the process is not finding an essential origin and recreating a past that links us up. But in the Americas, this is processes of differentiation. In other words, you see yourself in a system of differences, and you find this in, I think, in the writings of of Clisson, for example, who I quoted earlier, in Borges, and so forth. That you see yourself in relation to a multiplicity of pasts, which is like Guyana, with the slogan, "We are a land of 6 nations," but it's also the relationship to a multiplicity of pasts. And this is what you also find in Walcott, because he relates to India, to Africa, to Europe, and so forth. So I think that this is where my imagination came alive. There's a kind of challenge to the idea of essence. I mean, I don't think I'm essentially Greek, and even the Greek that I speak is different from the Greek that they speak in Athens.
Does that answer your question? Thank you. And do we have any other questions? I want to take this opportunity to ask you about the poetry aspect of your work.
Yeah.
I probably want to ask what inspires poetry? Why poetry?
Like poetry, I think there's, well, it's the essence of, it's the essence of all the arts, I think. And even if I work in all the arts, I try and be poetic. And I hope my film aim at being poetic. My prose aims at being poetic. And I think it's the essence because it works with illusion and ambivalence. And it breaks down hard definitions that are oppressive. So I think to be a poet, you have to be radical as well. So this is where poetics and someone said that they sense the politics behind it, but I think the poetics and the politics are connected. But being poetic is also you're avoiding being political. But at the same time, it's being radical because you're challenging the definitive statements that the political authorities would want. So it's subtly radical.
Thank you very much for your answer. Beautiful. I think we're now going to what?
Two online questions.
I didn't realize. I think we're going to have a few online questions now.
Oh, okay, great.
All right. We're going to have some online questions. I didn't even realize we have an online audience. Yes. I'm sorry.
So I'm going to quickly read them, and I want to acknowledge that there are a number of comments and other questions online, which I will personally share with you, Professor. But I just wanted to ask these three questions here. And this first one comes from Professor Edward Green, our former chancellor. And he asked, how would you define your philosophy of history? Is it more providential, like Augustine, idealist, like Hegel, or something else? How would you define your philosophy of history? This is from Professor Edward Green.
Okay, and what was how did he qualify it?
He qualified it by saying, is it more providential, like Augustine, idealist, like Hegel, or something else?
That's a challenging question. I would say it's not, I wouldn't say it's Hegelian for sure. Whether it's Augustine sounds interesting, but I haven't really thought about it, to be quite honest. But I like the idea, is it providential? Which was an interesting thought. I mean, it's something I would like to think about, if it's because in effect, when I was speaking at the beginning about accident, and when this accident becomes substance, that implies a certain providential. I mean, I know my community in Berbice would probably say it's providential. They feel that it was providence that took me there. Okay. So, but I mean, I think that, I mean, it's a good question to think about, but I don't know how conclusive I can be about it. I mean, Benjamin, rather than not Hegelian, but Walter Benjamin's thesis on the philosophy of history are meaningful to me because there's like cracks in the linearity of history where flashes come up, and these flashes you take and energize them. So again, maybe it's a poetic approach to history. I don't know. But anyways, food for thought is something I would think about, and I will certainly want to think more about Augustine as well.
Professor David Dabadine asked whether you will set up a Kali commune in Cyprus so we can all go there.
I would love it, and I have to say, and David, anyway, he has great questions, and one comment he made about my work, and that my wife heard and she was excited, is that he said that I'm an absolute eccentric. and what he recalled, I'll tell you this as an anecdote, because when I first went back, there's a Kali community now. One thing, I didn't want to show my film in Cyprus because for a long time after I went there, maybe I showed it 10 years after I was there. I thought, well, these people aren't going to understand it, and how am I going to explain it to them? And then someone said, oh, we heard you have a film, show it. And I showed the Kali film in this place that I'd never seen it so full. There were people sitting on the floor, on the steps, all over the place. So I thought, well, there's a hidden Kali cult here that I have to make to come alive. But the other thing that David remembers, and this is why he called me eccentric, is that in I think it was 92 or so, I just arrived. I hadn't been in Cyprus very long, and they had the head of governors, the Commonwealth head of governors there. And I heard that Chedi Jagan was coming to Cyprus. And I met him briefly for 2 or 3 minutes. I think it was before he became president at some party, and said, come and meet Chedi. So I thought, wow, the president of Guyana is in Cyprus. And I called up the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I said, oh, I said, I want to meet the president of Guyana. He knows me. Of course, there's no way he would have known me, but I lied. I mean, he wouldn't have remembered me. And lo and behold, at 1 o'clock in the morning, they passed on the message to me, and the phone rang at 1 in the morning. And I said, oh my God. And my wife said, oh, he's going to wake up our daughter. Who is this calling now? And I answered the phone, and he said, this is Chedi Jagan. Good evening, President. I lived in your country for many years, and I'm a writer and an academic, and I'm very fond of your country, and I'd like to see you again. And he said, David Dabadine is with me. I'll go and see David Dabadine. I hadn't met David then. So I said, sure. And what David remembers is that I turned up where this meeting was, full of security, and I don't know how many dozens of head of governments, and the Queen's boat. They were going to give the Queen the key to the city, but they were afraid of attacks because she was a hated figure for some in the 50s. And then he said, then you got through, somehow you managed to get through all of that security to come in and meet me. And then you started talking to me about Kali. And so yes, if I would love to have a Kali community in Guyana, and I'll bring all my pujaris over, yeah.
And now I'll read the final question and a comment. And I must acknowledge again that there are a number of persons that are commenting and asking questions, which I will forward to you. But I will read this exactly as is, because I think it's a very interesting question, and it may make you smile. And this is coming from Sita Shah, Dr. Sita Shah Roth. She was then Mohamed. And she asks, she says that the two of you were both part of Dr. Dennis Basir's class on folk religion. And at that time, you were antagonists as debaters about the similarities between symbols of Hinduism and Christianity. Dr. Roth says, Stefan, what do you remember of Dr. Dennis Basir and your first trip to the Kalimai Church on the East Coast? She also says, I always wanted to ask you, but you did not return to our class on Caribbean Studies. After that field trip, I was prevented from attending. I heard that you only returned sometime after with a dulak hung from your neck, attending a faculty board meeting where you made a very dramatic appearance and contributing to that meeting. She then goes on to say, actually, you returned to campus bare feet, wearing a white kurta and dhoti with a dulak hanging from your neck.
I have to say I have no recollection. And but I'm glad for sharing that memory. I really have no recollection at all. I was wearing a dhoti and barefoot and with a dolak, and I came to a faculty meeting. I really have, well, I think if I did that, that's wonderful, and I'm glad she reminded me. So David is right about my eccentricity, right? But I know I did feel it. And what was the first part of the question? That I had we had a debate about Dr. Basir who passed away.
She asked, what do you remember about Dr. Dennis Basir's class on folk religion? And the two of you were antagonists as debaters about the similarities between symbols of Hinduism and Christianity.
Again, I don't remember that. I don't remember that debate, and I don't know what side we were. Why we would have taken different sides. I don't remember having a deep disagreement with him about it. I remember traveling to Berbice with him. That first big puja, he was there with me, and subsequent to that, we met several times and we had discussions with him. But I don't remember why we would have been antagonistic about Hinduism and Christianity. I mean, basically, you know, my own position is I appreciate I think it's there are many worlds in this, and I appreciate the polytheism, and I'm resistant to the monotheism of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. I mean, I appreciate all religions, but in terms of where I would stand there, I feel I'm polycultural, I'm polyglossic, I'm polytheistic, and we create. There's millions of gods, and we create them, and there's millions of galaxies, and it's for me, it's another poetics of relationship. So, but I don't remember if Dennis would have disagreed with that necessarily.
And it was actually Dr. Roth who said that you and her were antagonist debaters on the similarities and the symbols between Hinduism and Christianity. It was not Dr. Dennis Basir.
Oh, okay.
It was Sita Mohamed.
Who's the person raising the question?
Sita Mohamed. You would know her as Sita Mohamed.
I wonder what her perspective was, and we were antagonistic. What religion is Sita Mohamed? It sounds Muslim, but Sita is Hindu, right? So.
Well, I know her to be Catholic, but she is also comes from a Hindu background too.
Okay. So I don't remember our disagreement. I mean, obviously, if you want, you can find similarities, even though the actual establishment of the religions would be differentiated from each other. But so, no, but I would like to go back to it if she has time to get in contact with me.
Well, she may attend the film screening this evening. And on that note, I'd like to finally make one comment, and this comes from Jillian Williams, and she says, please let Professor Stephanos know that this was delightful. Really thavasimos
In Greek, it's Thavmasio. Thavmasio.
Clearly, I don't speak Greek. And she asked, he mentioned screening of a film tonight. When will the film be available for viewing globally?
After it's premiered in international festivals, it will be available for viewing globally. I mean, the intention is to get it out there as quickly as possible.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I'll now hand over to Dr. Miller. Some of the other persons who asked questions also include some persons who asked questions include Professor David Gabardine, Professor Edward Green, Dr. Sita Sharoth, Mrs. Charlene Wilkinson, Miss Jillian Williams, Mr. Who's this? And Mr. Adams. Yes, and Mr. Adams. So those are some of the persons who asked questions, and
can we hear them? Do we have time?
We don't have time, but what I will do, we will forward some of those questions to you directly.
Can you just read?
Well, some of the questions and comments are just congratulating Professor on such a delightful presentation. One of the questions, I'm just going to read one question that Charlene Wilkinson asked. She says, "Dear Dr. Stephanos, thank you for reminding us of this precious gift of age. For us in Guyana, it is very important, especially when we are in a particular historical moment where we would like our elders to understand that they hold a particular treasure, the treasure you also hold, the treasure of languages other than the language of the colonizer. I do hope that you can continue here with us at UG to make those necessary journeys into the communities, to give courage to those elders, and to let them understand that it is the time they spend with the children who are only now learning to talk that enables us to transmit our languages to the future generations." And there are other questions about the film screening and so on, when and so on. So those are some of the encouraging questions and comments about your presentation this morning. I now hand over back to Dr. Miller.
All right. Thank you very much for such a wonderful session. And we were just reminded that we're probably running out of time. And I'm just gonna, is there anybody who has something that you really, really want to say before we wrap up? I'll give over to Director Carolyn.
Hello, thank you, Dr. Miller. Professor Stephanides, thank you for such a delightful conversation with us. It was heartwarming. We obviously would love if you could stay longer, but we know that you'd have to leave at some time. But what I really want to say is, for those in the audience here and for those who are online, those of you who are interested in the film screening this evening, you're welcome to join at the Theatre Guild, 6:30. We would love to see you in person. There is no virtual or online streaming of this event, so we would love to see you in person at the Theatre Guild this evening, 6:30. And I'm sure that we will continue some of the delightful conversation. Over to, I think.
Thanks very much, Director. And we've come to the point where on the program, I think it says, we'll have vote of thanks by Johnnell Henery. She's University of Guyana alumna. Could you please come forward? Okay. And I think just before we have the last item, the vote of thanks, our Deputy Dean is here, and she's going to have a special moment.
I must say thank you very much. Let's give him a round of applause. I was saying to Dr. Miller that I was very, very heartened by the link. There was so much distance. However, the experiences are similar. So thank you very much for the experiences you've brought to us and awakening in us our understanding of our cultures and the intermingling of the cultural experiences. So thank you very much. On behalf of the University of Guyana, Vice-Chancellor, the Dean, and the faculty, I'd like to make this presentation to you.
I think she has one more present to deliver. Could you? All right, thanks very much. We quite appreciate all that's happened here in this session, made us feel very comfortable, and the sharing of knowledge. And now Miss Henery is going to have the last moment. Thank you.
Okay. A pleasant good afternoon to everyone present today. Unfortunately, we're at the end of today's enriching session. However, I would like to share a quote with you from Robert Adams, who wrote, "Cultural differences should not separate us from each other, but rather, cultural diversity brings a collective strength that can benefit all of humanity." This quote perfectly captures the essence of today's lecture: ways of seeing migration, displacement, and cross-cultural imaginaries. The insight shared this morning reminded us of the importance of embracing diversity, appreciating different cultural perspectives, and recognizing the shared humanity that connects us all. And it leaves with us a lasting impact on our lives. To our presenter, Professor Stephanos Stephanides, I extend an heartfelt gratitude to you. Your ability to weave personal narratives with broader societal issues and differences challenged me, and I imagine all of us here, to think critically about the stories that shape our identities. Thank you for sharing your experiences and knowledge, allowing us to see the world through different lenses. And from my love for history, I would always remember one piece of note that you shared with us today, and it will always resonate with me. And you said, "Essence of tradition is the afterlife of what is past." And I truly, sincerely believe that. Thank you. To all our attendees that are physically here and online, thank you for your active engagement. Your presence and questions have enriched our discussions, demonstrating that learning is not a solo journey, but rather a collective endeavor. Each of you brought a unique insight that added depth to our understanding of the topic at hand. It is your enthusiasm and willingness to participate that truly made this session a success. Thank you. Sincere gratitude to the organizers of this event at the University of Guyana for hosting this significant and very enriching session. The university's continued commitment to fostering academic discourse, cultural understanding, and intellectual exchange is truly commendable. Through initiatives such as this, we cultivate an environment of learning, dialogue, and collective collaboration that benefits not only institutions, but society as a whole. So thank you. As we depart, I encourage each of us to reflect on the lessons shared and to continue these conversations within our communities and professional spaces. Let us carry forward the spirit of empathy, understanding, and cultural appreciation that has been at the heart of today's discussion. I wish everyone a safe journey and a pleasant remainder of the day. Thank you.